meeting is being recorded. This meeting is being recorded.
So we now join in the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Good afternoon. Welcome to Which Israel? Thank you for joining me in the 2 hours before the Eagles kickoff, if that is of interest to you, or just a lovely Sunday afternoon if football is not on your horizon.
Josh, are you okay?
Josh is muted.
There.
Okay.
I can hear you. Yep.
Sorry, I'm working off a Chromebook and still figuring out what I need to do to make everything happen. I will get the PowerPoint shared in a second. Unfortunately, I'm unable to see the video on my computer right now, but I have it up on my phone. Let me try restarting that. So I noticed that when I shared the screen, I muted, which is a flaw of the Chromebook. So the first activity does not need a slide, which is great. I just wanted to do a little quick word association. What do you think of when you think of the word Israel? Please just unmute and say what pops in your mind.
Insecurity.
Insecurity. Any others?
A thousand different things.
Pick one.
Oh, the name of Jacob.
The name of Jacob.
The promised land, which is filled
Promised
with
land.
It's filled with blood.
There we go. Anything else?
Chosen.
Anything else?
Chosen.
Chosenness.
Ooh.
That's a
That's a troubling one, isn't it?
That is a big concept.
War.
War. So all of these things come to mind when we think of Israel. And when I think of Israel, one of the first things that I think of is which one? Which Israel? Which Israel is the other person meaning? Because there are different conceptions of Israel and different Israels that people are referring to. Some people are referring to a land, some people are referring to a country, some people to a people, some people to a mixture of all of those. Okay. All right. It'd be easier to reverse this. Okay. Pardon me one moment, technical difficulty. I can't share my screen and also talk. So I need to flip the devices I'm using around. So just one moment. All right, can you hear me all right? Wonderful. So now I can share my screen. So in the beginning, the first time we reach the word Israel in Torah is when Jacob is renamed. That verse comes in Genesis 32. After Jacob has wrestled with the angel, and the being, the angel, whatever he's wrestling with himself, whatever your interpretation is, says to Jacob, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have wrestled with divine beings and with humans, and you have prevailed. And that word for wrestling, sarita, gives us the sar in Yisrael. Yisrael, often I've heard a little translation as God wrestlers. So the beginning, the very beginning of Israel is this change of name. And it isn't associated with the land right away, it's associated with a person. And also at the very beginning of the idea of Israel, before that, we have Abraham. And before he's even Abraham, when he's still Abram, that Hashem makes a covenant with him and says, I assign this land to your offspring from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, which is a wide span of territory and larger than any later definition of land of Israel that anyone uses in any great extent. So at the beginning of Israel, we have the person, and just a couple verses later, we get Bnei Yisrael for the first time, the children of Israel. And one of the names for the Jewish people, Bnei Yisrael, the Israelite people. In Genesis, it usually literally means Jacob's sons, but in all of Tanakh, it comes to mean the Jewish people as a whole. the Israelite people as a whole, depending on how you're thinking of the ancient people in the land, well before there were rabbis. So B'nai Israel shows up in Genesis, and the first time we see people of Israel comes in the book of Deuteronomy, and it's literally your people Israel, and it's in a prayer when there is someone who's been presumably murdered, found in a field and not in a town. This is the prayer at the end of the ritual to absolve that. Absolve your people, Israel, whom you redeemed, Adonai, and do not let guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people, Israel. The first time that it's the people of Israel, it's your people, meaning your people, God's people, Israel. So we have the people as B'nai and as Am, as children of, and as literally people. And the other time in Tanakh that we get an Israel introduced is actually in 1 Samuel, in the middle of the stories about Saul becoming king and David who will follow him. We get this strange little verse. No smith was to be found in all the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael. Because the Philistines were afraid that the Hebrews would make swords or spears. Now, Hebrew is also another word that is used throughout the Tanakh. Joseph, I believe, is the first one who really uses it in speech when he says that I'm from the land of the Hebrews, I was kidnapped. When he tells, I don't remember if it says Master Potiphar or if it's the other prisoners, how he ended up where he ended up. But that is how we get the beginnings of Israel. We get the person, we get the person's children becoming a people and the land. And this promise that these children would have this land. So when someone says Israel, which Israel? And I have listed here several. We have Jacob, the patriarch, the ancient people, the Israelites, B'nai Israel, thinking of them before the Second Temple times. We have the land, Eretz Yisrael, in all the different definitions, and it's defined differently in the book of Numbers than the book of Deuteronomy, and anywhere else in Tanakh. Sometimes the borders are a little bit different, sometimes they're much different, but it's always has that general same region. We have ancient states, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, which were around from about 900 BCE to 586 BCE for Judah. The kingdom of Israel was destroyed in 720 BCE. So about 400 years, 300-400 years worth of kingdoms. And also we have ancient civilizations or cultures. You can use either name. One of the things that happens in some stories in our Tanakh is someone says, that is not a thing done in Israel. And it isn't specified what Israel the person is referring to. Is it the people? Is it the land? Is it the country? Or is it some conglomeration of all of the above, which is where we get civilization or culture. The idea that there are behaviors that are and are not acceptable among this culture, among Israel, is part of how the indeterminate use of the word Israel actually begins. Because if it's just Israel, well, it could be the people and the land, or the people and the state and the land, or all of the above. Um, Thinking a bit more modern in our current context, we have B'nai Israel and Am Yisrael, which have similar, overlapping, but slightly different meanings. The people as B'nai Israel emphasizes that we are members of a family. Ultimately, we are we all have these common patriarchs and matriarchs, whether through direct lineage or perhaps, like in my case, through adoption. The idea that we are B'nai Israel, that we are the children of Israel, means that we are in some ways also the heirs of Israel, the person, and all the things associated with Israel. And the people as Am Yisrael, that talks about how we are a collective that is widely different in all sorts of ways, but we are united as a people by certain qualities that we share. The most primary one being that we identify as a member of Am Yisrael, that it is that we're a member, and it's something that's important to us. And exactly our relationship to that and how we deal with it, that differs. But that's okay. It's a people. People are contentious. People are diverse. So we have the two sides. We have the family and we have the diversity on the two sides of the people Israel. Then, of course, we have the modern state, Medinat Yisrael, the state that was founded in 1948, but the groundwork was being laid long before that. This is the one that I think most people, when they say Israel, most people are thinking of the state of Israel in some way, shape, or form. And what exactly they're thinking about that is part of why I keep asking which Israel, because there are some people who associate Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael. You can't have one without the other. And there are other people who say, well, we've always had Am Yisrael. Medinat Yisrael showed up in 1948, and that has changed relationships between the people and the land, and now the state. We also have the modern civilizations and cultures. There are multiple Jewish civilizations, according to Reconstructionist thought, that in each setting, the Jewish culture and the surrounding culture, they evolve together a little bit differently. In American Judaism and, say, Israeli Judaism, they are not the same culture per se. They might be the same civilization. There was actually a lot of argument among my colleagues at RRC, at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, about whether or not we should think of there being one Jewish civilization or many. And the consensus was that no, we should think of many. And then the question was asked, well, are there many now, or is it just many over the course of history? And I think the consensus was largely that there's at least more than one right now. But exactly how many was uncertain, especially since there's such a large conglomeration of Jews in the United States, and Israel and everywhere else. It has a much, much smaller piece of the Jewish population. I think Israel and the United States between them account for about 95% of the world's Jewish population. And we also have utopian ideals. Israel as an ideal, as a utopia, as something that is to be strived for. The many different ideas that become utopian ideals in Israel actually are a really important part of this question, which Israel? So we have the Garden of Eden, the vision of this perfect garden where all the plants are green, all the animals live in peace with each other, there is plenty of food, there's no need for violence. This idyllic place, everything is well watered. If you've ever lived in a place where you've experienced any level of drought or water restriction, the idea of this lush garden would be very attractive. So it makes sense why it was so attractive to our ancestors, who did deal with intermittent disruptions in rainfall in the land well before there were rabbis. And then in the rabbis' day, living both in the land and in diaspora, in Babylon and everywhere else, that whole part of the globe just deals with intermittent water shortages due to just natural variation in precipitation. So a lush garden, this utopian idea, that is in some ways some of the primordial idea of utopia. We also have the promised land. The promised land, this land flowing with milk and honey, where there will be enough food for everyone, where there will be justice. God promises in bringing the people out of Egypt that I will take you to a good land, a fertile land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And when they get there, when they get to the edge of the land the first time, and they send scouts throughout the land, the scouts come back and say, it is a good and fertile land flowing with milk and honey. And it also is inhabited by giants. So this vision of a promised land that is this good land that can just be settled in met the reality of, well, but there are already inhabitants in the land. But the idea of a promised land is a very powerful one that has been picked up by by people in our past, the future to the people who were coming out of Egypt, and it has been used in positive and negative ways, finding a place for religious freedom. Some of the colonists who ended up in what is now the United States talked about going to a promised land. And also, it was used to justify manifest destiny, the idea that white colonist descended peoples should conquer North America from sea to sea, that was our manifest destiny. It was a promised land. This land was promised to us, which is still a powerful idea that it undergirds several pieces of thinking in American culture, that this land is special, and it was promised to us, even if there was no promise of land to the us who's claiming that promise, much less the particular piece of land that we're talking about. We have the utopia of the prophetic visions, the ideas that we get in things like Amos and Isaiah, where justice is rolling down like mighty waters, where there are wise, humane leaders who make just and reasonable decisions for the good of all, those utopias arise out of a definite sense of lack. It is the lack of justice, the lack of support for the destitute among the people that prompts such prophetic visions of a time when there will be a land and a people that is at peace with each other, at peace with themselves. Shabbat itself is a little slice. The rabbis say a 60th, which is their standard, smallest conceivable fraction. Shabbat is a 60th of Olam Haba, the world to come. The idea that everyone gets to take a pause and rest, and even God takes a pause and rests on Shabbat, has a utopian feel to it. The idea that there will not be labor for anyone to do in a particular day, thinking historically ignores the very real and very important labor of about half of the human population, because feeding children, clothing children, keeping track of where the children are, is in fact very rigorous labor. And that does not stop on Shabbat, the way that the work in a field or a factory or an office stops. We have the rabbis' imagined history. There are different layers in the rabbinic tradition, and the layers that come after the temple is destroyed and the people are largely no longer living in the land. The Jewish people are in diaspora, and there's only a small sliver living in the land because Rome has forcibly expelled them. About 135 CE was when Rome finally put its foot down for really the last time and crushed the Jewish resistance that kept popping up for the previous 200 years. And the rabbis imagined back before that to this idyllic time when the temple is working and all the religious structures are working, and they describe how everything should work in an optimal way based on this imagined history, knowing also that the imagined history and the reality often didn't really intersect. The idea that someone would bring a guilt offering and a sin offering to the temple for various offenses relies on the idea that the person has enough means to do so, which historically has not always been true, that a person could afford to bring several offerings to the temple on a regular basis for transgressions major and minor committed in their lives. We have Olam Haba, the world to come, which the rabbis really talk about and think about, and like, what will it be like? What will the world to come be? Well, there will be justice, there will be peace. It will be Shabbat all the time, everywhere, and all the labor will be taken care of. We won't need to do any unless we want to, sort of thing. The Olam Haba is in some conceptions an afterlife, and in other conceptions, it's really is something that happens on Earth. It is a change, a shift in how the world operates in a utopian way. There are Kabbalistic visions of utopia, of going up to God's palace, God's chambers, and also bringing the divine down to earth and meeting the divine and the ground together in this utopian way that humans can participate in. The Messianic era, the idea that there will be a time when there is justice because there is a Messiah who has had wrought political redemption and liberation for everyone, who brings justice and peace. Whether there is in fact a specific person, or it's just that time when everyone has reached that level of goodwill towards each other, where there is no more violence, there's no more war, there's no more hate. Zionism itself is a utopia. The idea that there's this land that this people has a connection to has a very utopian ring to it, because there's always been a small Jewish presence in the land since the time of the Second Temple. But it hasn't, the Jewish people had not been in control of that territory from about 100 BCE through 1948. And so the idea that we could leave the shtetl in Eastern Europe and go to this land where we're in control and things are different was very attractive to people in the early 1900s. The Israeli Declaration of Independence, which we'll get to come back to in a minute, lays out a utopian vision of the land. There are so many others. Utopia comes out of a desire, a longing for something that we do not have. And so when we ask which Israel, we can ask which utopia, which vision of this ideal place are you meaning? And diverging modern utopias. A Jewish state, we want it all. This is from a contested utopia by Mark J. Rosenstein. An ethnic nation state that is a paragon of social justice, a warm community that is a powerful state, a normal modern state that is ruled by Jewish law, an equal member of the family of nations living within divinely ordained boundaries. And on the right, I have listed out several different utopian ideas that people have now today about what Israel could and should be, spanning from the prophet's visions and reinstituting a Jewish monarchy, to the idea of having this normal state, enlightened, modern, cosmopolitan, that we may be like all the other nations, as the people say to Samuel when they're asking for a king. And so I want to ask you about all these different utopias. Which of these options are particularly attractive to you? Pardon me 1 second. There's an alarm that is going off, and I need to go check the building real quick. So pardon the interruption. Can you hear the beeping, Abraham? No?
No.
Okay. If anyone on the call is knowledgeable about the alarm, I would appreciate knowing what I should do if it's giving fire alarm type reading, but there is no indication of fire anywhere in the building. If I should just reset it.
I'm driving. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
It says fire.
Yeah, it says smoke something and fire.
Huh. I haven't seen that one before. Did you press
not your-
escape? Did you press escape? But it does concern me that it says that, of all things. I don't know whether it's actually connected to fire detectors or smoke detectors. I don't think it is.
Okay,
Did you press escape?
I tried it. It's still showing the alarm, but it's not beeping.
Okay, I think if there's obviously any smell or any other alarm goes off, then you can call 911.
Yeah,
But in the meantime, if it's quiet after this call, we can try to figure out what to do.
yeah, okay.
I want to also mention that smoke alarms, when their batteries get low, will chirp.
Well, yes, yes, yeah.
Although that's, it shouldn't say smoke and fire. Usually it said something about, a window's open or a door is not closed. So I don't
Yeah.
really understand why it says that, but if no other alarms are going off for the moment, unless you want to take a quick sweep of the building and just use your,
I did.
unfortunately, yeah. Oh, you did?
I did.
Okay.
I did do that.
Okay. Well, I would think if there really were a smoke alarm would be going off. So if
Yeah.
everything seems okay, let's just talk at the end of this and try to figure it out together.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Pardon the interruption. So back to utopia. The idea of utopia, utopia literally comes from the Greek meaning not a place, a place that doesn't exist. And so I want to know which ideas of utopia, whether the ones I went over on the previous slide or some of the ones from this slide or any other idea of utopia. Is there an idea of utopia about Israel that is compelling for you individually?
I would like to just react. I mean,
Yeah.
Most of the items listed, going back to the citations in Genesis, are powder kegs ready to explode. I mean, even the geography of going to the great rivers, I'm assuming the Tigris and Euphrates, and suppose the settlers of Israel say, God's in, that's our land. We'll just take over Iraq and Iran, I mean, come on, I mean, let's deal with reality. So, and the other thing is how many choices do we have there that are not we, they? We're chosen, our right, our culture, our thing, and the others, they can be slaughtered because they really had permission to, blood forgiveness. Now, the only thing that makes sense for me is that last one, the normal state of enlightened modern cosmopolitan policy. The half of, at least the Haredim would reject that as they are doing today. I mean, this is powder keg time.
Yeah, which Israel is very.
Forgive my passion about this, but it really is a very dangerous time. And a lot of it comes out of which one you believe to be, sacred, which words are the words of God, as opposed to, and what does that do in terms of living in a community in a peaceful way?
Right. Thank you. That's, it is a very powder keg sort of time. It's a powder keg sort of area. It's been a territory that people have contested vehemently over for 3 or 4 millennia, because empires wanting to do trade, the place, that swath, that strip of ground that the modern state of Israel occupies is one of the best highways going from Asia Minor or anywhere north and east of that to Egypt. And so Egypt would occasionally swing up and try to conquer it, or someone would swing down and try to conquer it, and back and forth it would go. Much less considering what the Jewish people have been in contest with. And then with the rise of Christianity and Islam competing Christian and Muslim kingdoms in the Middle Ages, it's just been a contested land for a very long time. Anita, I see.
Yeah, in answer to your question, I kind of like thinking of it more like the national home, organic cultural roots, and also a Torah state without the word law at the end, sort of this ideal, the land according to Torah, the imagined Israel, I think, is mostly, when I'm thinking of which Israel, that's mostly what's in my mind, as well as, the actual current nation state, a place that I also really love to visit and be with people. But I think when I just like think of it, like which of these utopias come to mind, it's more of that, like sort of, the land according to Torah. Less of the emphasis on the law part of it, though, but of the, that sort of idealized, imagined, perfect state.
Place where someone who has been wronged can get justice, and there's fertility for everyone.
Yeah.
I see your hand, Barbara, and Abraham. I know you were about to say something else. So
No, I see Barbara has her hand up.
okay.
I will say something after Barbara.
I hate to hold back Abraham. I really do. But I think it's easy and wonderful to believe in an ideal, just the idea of a utopia. My favorite period of Israel was the Back to the Land movement in Europe, like before the wars, even before the wars, with the initial Zionism, where people got worked up about going back. And they founded the kibbutz movement. They were in these like basically communes, collective farms.
Yeah.
And they worked for a very long time. I understand they've changed now. But how some socialism mixed in the mix. And they were not a threat, like at that point, to people that were living there. It seemed that there was much more in the beginning anyway. There was much more cooperation. And that was, to me, that was like a kind of an ideal state, just the way we sort of romanticize the founding fathers.
I certainly support what you're saying, and I love the power of the beginning of the kibbutzim. But note, they were mostly secular people who needed to find a safe place. So there was a whole different kind of motive of willing to share, willing to to work, willing to and they were driven by wanting to be safe.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other reflections people want to offer at this time? Yeah, the many of these different utopian ideas actually appeal to me personally. An idea of a socialist economic system that has this Jewish character to it, the way that kibbutzim functioned. And I think a handful of them still do function, but that the idea that we all have a hand and a share in the work and in the produce. The idea that we have this idealized community that is basically self-reliant in a lot of major ways, and makes connections with the surrounding communities for the skills and the materials that we don't have immediate access to. But the idea that, you see everyone in the community, and there really is one shul that everyone goes to, and you make it work. And growing up in a small town, the idea that you're just in it with your neighbors, and you have to figure out how to make it work. And when it does, how it can reach a level of becoming such an important ideal. And the Israeli Declaration of Independence manages to pull some of those ideas together. Eretz Yisrael was the birthplace of the Jewish people. These are three different little snippets from the Declaration of Independence, from slightly different parts. But there were pioneers who settled in places where no one was really making anything grow, and made something grow. The Mapilim, the immigrants and defenders, made the deserts bloom. Hebrew language was revived. It was never really fully dead. It was always a holy language. It's always a sacred language. There were writings in Hebrew all through from the rabbinic era up to the revival of modern or the institution of modern Hebrew. But they were limited, and a lot of the more important Jewish works from the medieval period were actually written in Jewish Arabic, and only later translated into Hebrew. Some of them were originally composed in Hebrew, but the Hebrew language coming back to life in this conception, and becoming a language that people are using in the everyday, and not just in the synagogue, but in their everyday interactions. Villages and towns, a thriving community, controlling its own economy and culture, loving peace, but knowing how to defend itself, bringing the blessings of progress to all the country's inhabitants, and aspiring towards independent nationhood. This very high aim, our hope and our aim is to reach this level of making this thriving community that is able to be a blessing to everyone. And it will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. Ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions. The language here and the reality that they diverge hurts. It hurts everyone who reads this language and looks at the Israel we have and goes,
Yes, I'm home.
it's short, and it falls short here. Like this utopian idea in this Declaration of Independence, and the reality on the ground, the mismatch is painful. No matter what your position on any of this is, it's a painful mismatch, because there's a desire for it to do better and be better that has not has not manifested the way that I would venture to say anyone has wanted. And when we talk about which Israel, and we talk about which utopia, which utopian ideal, which vision, what we really get to is which values. Confronting which Israel means honestly examining what are your Jewish values? What are my Jewish values? What do I value that makes me go, oh, this socialist ideal is great. The idea of living according to Torah and having everything work is great. What does that mean that I value? And this work can be very messy. It can be very scary because sometimes our values are in conflict with each other, and they are deeply held values that are deeply in conflict, and we haven't sorted out which one rises in importance above the others. And it's not something I think we need to do, but I think wrestling, getting back to Yisrael, wrestling with God, wrestling with ourselves, wrestling with our highest values and ideals, that's an imperative piece of the work of answering the question, which Israel? And knowing that the people on the other side of our dialogues about Israel may or may not have done that work themselves, makes these conversations complicated and powder kegs, as Abraham said. It is completely possible for things to explode because someone has not examined their values as closely as they might maybe should have.
I'd like to speak to a little bit to this whole idea of utopia. I really feel privileged in some ways, having seen at least 3 such utopias. 10 years ago, Cher and I visited Israel. We spent several days at a kibbutz, and the family we were staying with, the father of the couple with whom we stayed was part of the origination of that particular kibbutz, and told the whole story of how they erected the fence overnight because it was still under the Turks' control, and all they went through and how they shared things. I mean, you didn't own your own clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, we got this full detailed account, but yet the whole, the kibbutz is hanging on there, but it's not what it was. They have a couple of thriving businesses there that undergird them, but nobody owns anything. But yet they've separated, and they've had problems with people not being honest with outside jobs, but don't bring the money in to pool with other people, so they evict those people. Then I had a chance, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I knew about a Christian utopian society in upstate New York, and Cher and I went there. We spent an afternoon with them, and it was fascinating. They have their own manufacturing facilities, they have their own communal things, and it was totally dedicated to Christian ideas in a very specific way. I mean, they wanted us to stay for dinner, didn't. And then years ago, we had a chance to visit a Hindu utopia, and it's Oroville, started by a sect of Hindu-based ideas, and that still exists today, but it never grew beyond 2,500 people. They've had their schisms. That's part of the problem with human beings. The idea belongs in the head. When you get it down to practicalities, it has to be a family. And how big can a family be when it ceases to be a family? I mean, the history of civilizations are that if you know everybody's name, apparently it's something like 300 people, then you feel comfortable that you're in a family. If it goes beyond where you don't know everybody, it becomes something else. And there's something inherent in all of this that makes it difficult to live under a utopia situation. Yet we can still worship the idea. I mean, I love the idea, but how do you make it work?
Yeah, that if anyone has the answer to that question, you will they would rapidly become one of the most popular people in the world. Because there are so many people who would be very, very willing to fork over any belongings that they may or may not have for having that idea. So yeah, our values really determine what our thoughts and feelings about Israel are, which should not be a surprise. But the reflection that we do matters a great deal. And one of the times that which Israel is really a specific question and even difficulty is the value and the mitzvah of Ahavat Yisrael, the love of Israel. What does Ahavat Yisrael really mean? And there are four possible answers. There are many, many others, but four possible answers that encapsulate most of the range that I see. Does it mean to love each and every other Jew individually, as an individual? Does it mean to love Am Yisrael, the Jewish people as a whole? Does it mean to love Medinat Yisrael, the modern state? Does it mean to love Eretz Yisrael, the ground itself, that particular region, that particular territory? What does Ahavat Yisrael mean? And different Jewish groups have different answers. A very traditional Chabad answer is that first one: to love each and every other Jew as an individual, to love your neighbor as yourself. It's just a classic Hasidic approach, and it like to love the whole people, you have to love each one. So that is one possibility. There are some Jews that I've talked to that say that it should be the modern state, specifically the modern state. Even though this mitzvah is hundreds of years old, the modern state now trumps everything else in terms of what we should focus on when we say Ahavat Yisrael, because for them it encapsulates all the others. I've talked to people who say it's Am Yisrael. It is the people as a whole, and it is out of the love of the people as a whole that we act. And I've actually heard someone facetiously, but in a very serious way as well, making an argument that it's actually the ground, that particular ground, because it changes people, because it is inherently sacred ground. It's the place where God chose that God's name would dwell there in the temple. It's the place that God picked out and said, that's the land I'm going to give my chosen people. It's the chosen land for the chosen people. And which Yisrael do you mean when you say Ahavat Yisrael? Which and what blend of these or any of the other options? There are people who I'm sure cultivate a particular kind of veneration for individual major heroes, more or less, in Jewish history. And is it literally the patriarch Jacob? Is it one of the rabbis, one of the many, many rabbis whose first name was Israel? Like there are so many options for what Ahavat Yisrael means. And so when someone says, oh, I'm doing this out of Ahavat Yisrael, knowing what they value helps you understand what they mean, because which Israel are they valuing? Which Israel are they loving? Which Israel do we love? So coming back to the idea of values, what your Jewish values are determines a large part of what you think about this. And if you don't know what your Jewish values are, you can work backwards. You can figure out what you think about Israel and which Israels are most attractive to you, and figure out what your values are based on those. And what framework we use matters a great deal. How are we interpreting all the different pieces? How are we interpreting Jewish history as a whole? So there's an article that is older than I am by David Hartman, Auschwitz or Sinai? And the article is a few pages long. You can find it just by Googling Auschwitz or Sinai. But Hartman very clearly is orienting himself towards Sinai. So his depiction of these two orientations is biased in a very clear way, and trying to take a little bit of the bias out. I couldn't get it all out. I think it really actually encapsulates two of the major ways that people think about the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And on the one side, we've got Auschwitz, we've got the trauma of the Shoah. The survivors, the direct survivors, are rapidly aging into non-existence. There are few and far between people who were personally directly traumatized by the Shoah. But there's an essence of self-pity of, oh, poor us. Jewish history being this just sequence of persecutions that the most recent one was one of the most terrible. If my memory serves, it was something around a third of the world's Jewish population died in the Shoah, which is not the worst disaster to befall the Jewish people, but is in terms of like fraction loss, but is the second worst. The worst was when Rome expelled the Jewish people in 135 CE. Several of them were killed rather than expelled, and something like half of the world's Jewish population at that time died over the two major revolts in 65-70 CE and in 130-135 CE. The two great Jewish revolts against Rome. About half the Jewish population between the two, about half the world's Jewish population was killed. But the idea that we are an afflicted people creates this orientation toward building strength and ensuring safety, that never again shall anyone oppress us in such a manner. And Hartman points this toward victimization and moral superiority, and he makes up a quote in his article that I've quoted here. No one can judge the Jewish people because no one has suffered as we have suffered. We are special, we are unique, and our chosenness is not a blessing, it's a curse. But because of that, we have an inherent moral superiority. And Hartman's ultimate assessment is that it is politically and morally dangerous for a nation to perceive itself essentially as the suffering remnant of the Holocaust. That is Hartman's assessment of that framing. But so many Jews that I know have some or a significant amount of their understanding of recent Jewish history really based in the trauma of the Shoah that they witnessed in their parents and their grandparents, the generational traumas that get passed on, the cognitive notion that can be traumatizing. Thinking about a third of the world's Jews being killed because we were Jews. It's an important framing that a lot of people use. And Hartman argues that we should rather use the framing of Sinai. We have a covenant at Sinai, which creates a sense of moral sensitivity rather than superiority. The orientation is toward a responsibility to act to become a holy people. That's an orientation toward mitzvot, defined broadly, but in a very wholehearted manner. The mitzvot that makes us a holy people. Abraham.
Yeah, I want to comment here also. Hartman's an interesting guy, and I really appreciate his thinking. But Sinai, the underpinnings of that doesn't necessarily require a land of Israel. I mean, the American Jews can live Jewish values without living there.
Yeah.
The whole idea of moral sensitivity is a universal one, and that I consider to be holy in one respect. On the other hand, I'm inclined to think that Israel would not have happened without the trauma of Auschwitz. That whole deciding thing of the world coming, the UN coming together and say, all right, you guys can have it, They didn't want to, but they did. This is what you get for suffering so much.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah. I mean, the modern state of Israel was founded more on inaction than action. By the three U's, the UK saying we are no longer going to rule over what was called at the time the Mandate of Palestine. The UN did not step up and was still too young in its existence as a UN to really act as well. I guess the four U's, and the United States and the USSR also said, the United States said, yes, we're going to recognize the country, and the USSR said, we're not going to stop you, and didn't act. And that action, that small action, inaction, created the state of Israel, and the motivations for a lot of the inaction or action were in some ways based in the trauma of the Shoah, guilt about not stopping it sooner, guilt about not addressing the scale of it sooner. And it's, last I knew, it was fiercely debated among scholars exactly when the United States figured out what was happening. But there are some who think that the United States knew the entire time what Hitler and the Nazis were doing. And yeah, in World War II, there are a lot of heroics that are to be celebrated, and a lot of things in action that created a whole lot of problems. So how when we talk about Israel, I think we have two basic questions that we are faced with now. How are our or your values and ideas for a Jewish utopia best expressed? So how yours and how mine work together, and how everyone's worked together to create the idea of a Jewish utopia, and then how to best express that. The situation that world Jewry faces right now is one of overall security and stability of a level that was almost unknown in previous eras. I think the only other times are when we get into our mythic history, where it's not clear that it's truly historical fact, but the kingdoms of David and Solomon, this almost Arthurian but Jewish early age. And so we've got utopia on one side, and what do we do with the Medina Israel that we have is another question that is very difficult for a lot of people to answer, because there are values that we have that conflict over what we think a just and peaceful government would look like, and what the reality on the ground is, and how there's going to continue to be a mismatch between what we want and what is, that shows no signs of getting better. But with these two questions, taking either of them, what do you think? How should we go about talking about our Jewish values and utopian ideas, and working toward a better expression of them? And then on the other side, how do we support Israel becoming a better version of itself? Which I think everyone who is in any way attached to Israel, I think everyone wants it to be a better version of itself than it currently exists. So, these two questions, either of them, both of them, would any of you like to address them in this moment?
I'll start. What we're doing today, learning, exposing ourselves to ideas and examining issues, focusing our attention on choices that we have available to us, is part of Jewish values. We are practicing that by doing this.
Anita?
I would just kind of add to just what Abraham was saying. A couple of things. First, looking at, thank you for bringing the three little sections of the Declaration of Independence onto that slide. And for us, I can't say that I've spent lots and lots of time studying the Jewish Declaration of Independence, but that last paragraph that you shared with us, that felt to me like the Israel that I would love to feel like, was the way I really could acknowledge the actual current nation state of Israel. And I find sometimes, like, for instance, when I'm teaching children, and I'm talking about Israel, I'm mostly, the way I'm sort of talking about it, it's more the imaginary Israel or the historic Israel, from the time of, our forefathers, really. And but recognizing that I wish we all had more opportunities to do this, and more about understanding Israel's history, geopolitical history and current state as well. I don't feel like, even though, again, I have friends and colleagues there, but I don't feel like I have, even among those people, you know, I feel like they're mostly all sort of on one kind of in one, well, both physical and ideological area. And so I don't get very many opportunities to hear or talk about or, you know, wrestle with different opinions about this. And so it's really helpful to try to do that and to kind of like, you know, bear this open a little bit. Like
Yeah.
how far this is away from, you know, I think just even seeing the words Jewish and utopia in a very modern concept hardly resonates anymore on some level, if you know what I mean. Certainly historically, but currently, yeah, I feel like those terms barely go together at the moment. So it's really helpful to, you know, to take this on in more than just in a, you know, idealized fashion, but to really try to, you know, study it and talk about it.
Rabbi Diana.
I feel that I want to know, I always want to know more. First of all, I really appreciate how you put this together and the questions you asked. Yasher Koach in a huge way. I'm always curious to know what's happening on the ground in Israel from people who are living there. And I think, I mean, not only, you know, potentially visiting, but having people come in through Zoom or a long time ago, we had someone who's living there come in. But I think it'd be interesting for a group of us to plan many different perspectives, discussions with people. There are people who are in our area who are like shaliachs, like people from Israel who can come in and talk. But there's also people who are there now. And I actually have one person who I'm just waiting to schedule, who's already going to be bringing a Jewish environmentalist perspective in. But I think hearing people who live there and their perspectives and choosing which perspectives we want to hear would be really interesting in conversation to keep growing from people who have a stake with their lives by living there on the ground.
Yeah.
And pushing it a little, so, you know, we don't only bring in the ideas and things that feel already somewhat more comfortable for us.
Although us is there's a big range of us at KHN actually.
Yeah, I think that's true, but just, yeah.
Yeah, so, but I agree. So a range would be not just a one-off, but a bunch, so that people know, oh, there's a reason why we're bringing in this settler. And there's a reason why we're bringing in this person who believes in one state, one democratic state. We're not just saying, I agree with this, but more like, let's hear these different voices.
Yeah, and I love the idea of it including other, you know, it doesn't only have to be sort of from a political frame, things like the environment, you know, social services in Israel, because of course they're overlapped with all the other values as well. And the individuals, you know, nobody's operating strictly in a single frame of mind either.
And especially if we do plan a trip there for sometime next year, it'd be great to do a whole bunch of learning leading up to it.
Yeah.
Wow.
God willing, it will be safe enough in terms of powder keg. Seriously, I mean, it's just very disturbing what's happening on the ground in Jenin last week, I just found out, and also obviously what just happened in East Jerusalem, and etc. And what could happen now because of what just happened in East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And the right-wing government is not shy at all about doing as much violence, I think, honestly, as possible. I'm not feeling very hopeful at this very moment.
When I graduated from college, I went to Israel for various reasons, and I lived on a kibbutz in the Galilee region, and I saw a very militarized country. It is difficult for us to realize the heavy toll that takes on the psyche of a people. And the young people I met there, a lot of them wanted to leave. A lot of them did leave because they didn't want to be part of the, military industrial complex there. It is hard to live in Israel. I mean, I think like huge amounts of them smoke. Whenever I was in the kitchen working the kibbutz, everyone had the radio on. They were always listening to the news. And this was 35 years ago or so. I mean, but what was also thrilling being there is that meeting the whole range of Judaism and stories. You would not believe the stories. People walked 2,000 miles out of Europe to get there. I mean, the children of the parents that came there from out of war. I mean, there's all that tension of the young people kind of rejecting what they have to swallow, and then the older people, being still idealistic. They were very close to the founding of their country when I was there. And it made me come back to America, like how patriotic we would be if we were like 25 years in.
Mm.
I mean, there was there's so much going on there. It is hard to get your arms around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 25 years into the United States, depending on which time you want to use, if you want to use the Constitution and the actual like creating the government system that we have, 25 years in puts us right in the middle, I think, of the War of 1812 or so. Right around that time. So like, yeah, there would have been a whole lot of patriotism happening. So which Israel? Which Israel? Which Israel? The many options and the different bundles that we refer to and mean. Because I've studied biblical texts so much, I can't say Yisrael without thinking of wrestling and Jacob and Bnei Yisrael, the Israelite people, before the exile to Babylon. Eretz Yisrael as in its fungible boundaries in the Tanakh. Those are always going to color how I think about Israel, thinking of the Jewish people today, thinking of the modern state. There's a connection between the ancient and the new, in a way that is compelling and complicating as well.
So isn't the Genesis wrestling a metaphor for what we're doing now? We are struggling and wrestling with this whole subject you've brought to us. That is alive right now in me.
Yeah. And I was looking at that, the second to last slide that I had. What do we do with the Medina Israel that we have, and realizing that, I could take that and turn it around on myself. And what do we do with the America that we have?
Yes.
Totally agreed.
We were reminded again, very, very recently, of structures that are not working very well in our country. And a right-wing chamber in government will prevent any attempts at making major reforms unless those reforms are reactionary and in line with their values. And just that, our values, our ideals, our Jewish utopia. I would like where I live to be more utopian than it is. And I would like the state of Israel to be more utopian than it is. And the work to get either place closer is very hard and lifelong, and may not bear fruit in my lifetime. But I was reminded of the story of Honi, who planted, who saw the person planting the carob tree and fell asleep under the tree, and 70 years went by before the tree produced fruit, and now Honi wakes up and there's the fruit. And I don't have that luxury. I can't do something and then wait 70 years for the fruit to arrive. I will just have to trust that anything I plant today will take root and grow. And so I want to leave you with that reflection. Wish you a wonderful Sunday afternoon. Tu B'Shvat coming up. There are several seders happening. We would love to see you at any of them.
And thank you very much for this very thoughtful presentation.
Yasher Koach.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yasher, thank you, Josh. Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, and exciting that it continues, right?
Yeah.
Hi, Mom.
Have a great week.
Oh, Mom, you're muted. You're muted, Mom.
So happy I could be here. Thanks.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.